Darem and Kostroma, please.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can I share?
Switch.
Can I share?
Yeah, what do I do? Stop share.
Stop
Yes,
share.
let's stop.
That's it. Is that it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
I need. Okay. Can I share my presentation now? Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
please, Olga.
There we go. Can everyone see it? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Excellent. So I'll try slideshow. I'll try to be as concise as possible. And I'm presenting Kostrom and Darem here, and I want to talk about my favorite museums in Kostrom and Darem. There are lots of museums in Kostrom and in Darem and in County Darem, and nowadays there are private museums as well, but I have my absolutely favorite ones, and Kostroma is also one of the cities of Golden Ring of Russia, as we've visited two cities of the Golden Ring, so now we're going to Kostroma. And the real gem and the main attraction of Kostroma is the Petistianak Monastery, and I was privileged to work for 14 years in that museum when it was a museum. I would like to take you briefly through the history of the place, which is absolutely fascinating. That's how it looks now. It's like a fairy tale. But the monastery was, so you have some information in Russian there, but I'll be speaking in English. According to the legend, the Petistianak Monastery in Kostroma was founded by a Tatar Chet in the 14th century, and he was the ancestor of the Godunovs. So there are still some burial vaults of the Godunovs in the Petistianak Monastery, and the family, the Godunov family, was making generous donations to the Petistianak Monastery, especially when the Godunovs became to prominence at the court of Ivan the Terrible, and later when Boris became the Tsar himself. And that's why in the second half of the 16th century the wooden structures of the monastery were replaced by the stone ones. From the beginning of the 17th century, the monastery was patronized by the new Tsarist family, the Romanovs, because, the beginning of the 17th century in Russia was the time of troubles, when there was an intervention, and we had false Demetrius I, the second, who claimed to be the last son of Ivan the Terrible, Dmitry, who was killed or died in Uglitch. Still not very clear story there. But anyway, in 1612, Moscow was freed from Poles. And in February 1613, there was a council, All-Russia Council in Moscow, that elected a new Tsar, Mikhail Romanov, who was at the time in Kostroma. And they were in the Petistianak Monastery to receive the delegation of the Russian Council. And that's where Mikhail gave his consent to become the Tsar of Russia, and he became the first Tsar of the Romanov dynasty. So the Petistianak Monastery acquired these new patrons, and with them came new donations and new buildings as well. They donated with land and books and all sorts of church things like discuses and chalices. This beautiful building is called the Romanov House. That's where Mikhail and his mother stayed when the delegation from Moscow arrived to the monastery. And most of the Tsars of the Romanov dynasty visited Kostroma and the Petistianak Monastery. So here you can see Nicholas II, during the celebrations of the 300th anniversary of the dynasty in 1913. After the revolution, the monastery was closed, but luckily it was used for flats. Families of textile workers lived in the former cells, and of course it came to, so that the state of the buildings were quite poor in the middle of the 20th century, but anyway, that's how they survived. And in 1958 the museum was created in the monastery buildings, and there were huge restoration works, and the Trinity Cathedral was brought back to its glory. So that's when I was working in the museum in the 70s, 80s, when it was a museum in the beginning of 90s. And then gradually from the end of the 20th century, the monastery buildings were started being given back to the Russian Orthodox Church, and nowadays it's just a monastery. But there is a museum, a church historical museum in the monastery, and of course the main attraction there is the Trinity Cathedral that dates back from the middle of the 17th century, and it is lavishly decorated inside. It has this beautiful 5-tier iconostasis, carved of wood and gilded, and the icons date back from the 17th, 18th century, and most of them were painted by Kostrome icon painters, and the whole all the walls and walls of the cathedral are decorated with wall paintings, again done by Kostrome painters under the leadership of Guri Nikitin and Sila Savin. By the way, they also worked in Yaroslavl, and they decorated the Church of Elijah the Prophet there. The museum boasts a very rich collection of icons and church things. Like here you can see this gate or door, which is done in the very old technique as gilding on metal, and then books, gospels and gospel covers, again made of usually silver, gilded silver, decorated with precious stones. So there are a few very, very interesting exhibitions in the monastery, in the museum of the monastery. In 2006, Prince Michael of Kent visited the monastery, because, you know, the Romanovs were related to the British royal family. So there's still this connection, and Prince Michael gave this bell to the monastery, and the bell is called Za Mikhail. Okay. So it's on the monastery belfry now. And just this year, in January of 2021, Georgi, Grand Prince of George Mikhailovich, he is the son of the head of the Romanovs' house. He was betrothed to his fiancée Victoria Bettarini. I think they're going to have their wedding in St. Petersburg, but for this ceremony of betrothal, they came to the Ipatiev monastery, which shows that they still hold, the Romanovs still hold the monastery quite high. The attitude. This in 1956. This interesting church was brought to the territory of the monastery because the Kostroma reservoir was being created at that time, and to save a few interesting, beautiful wooden structures, they brought them to the monastery. And that's how the Museum of Wooden Architecture began in the 1950s. Unfortunately, this very church, which I think Nikolai Nekrasov, our famous poet, knew very well, because he liked to go hunting in those places and described them in his poems and compared these places to Venice, because all the structures were there on stilt, because it's the territory of Kostроме lowlands, which was flooded annually during spring floods. Unfortunately, this very church was burnt down in 2002, but it gave the idea, and it was the first monument of the Museum of Wooden Architecture and Peasant Householding, which is situated outside the monastery walls, and it looks like natural Russian village with various types of wooden structures. Like you can see here, you can see various sizes and various types of the houses, but the main idea or the main principle of building houses in the northern parts of Russia was to combine all the structures under the same roof. Like here you can see the front of the house, that's the living room, and then the back was for kettle, for storing hay and agricultural implements, tools, means of conveyance, and everything was under the same roof, which was very practical in such cold climate, when peasants could do practically all the works about the house without going outside much. So this is another type of peasant house. Looking at the houses, you can judge whether the owner was well off. Like the previous ones were quite modest and small in size. This is a bigger one. This is called Petistianak, like 5-walled house. Why is it Petistianak? There are 4 walls, and this is in the middle, the 5th one. It's not just a partition, it's a proper wall which was built together with the main framework of the house, and it was difficult to build such houses, and they were more expensive. And just looking at this construction, you can say, yes, it belonged to a quite wealthy peasant, plus the carvings. So there's a lot of carvings there, which was also an expensive thing to have. Inside, everything was practical, and in this museum you can also go inside the house and see how the peasants lived. So this is Russian stove, which is a wonder, and you can't overestimate its role in the peasant household. It kept the house warm, and you could sleep on top of the stove because it was a warm place. All food was cooked in the stove. You could dry mushrooms and berries that you brought from the forest in the stove. If say the owner of the house was a potter, then he could bake his pottery in the stove. And if the family was not rich enough to have a bathhouse, which is normally sort of a separate structure, then they could go inside the stove to have this steam. So a stove was like a small sauna. It was possible to get inside to steam there, and that was a replacement of a sauna. It usually occupies nearly a quarter of the living space, and normally just one room in the house would have a stove. So in winter the whole family would live in the same room. And here you can see a hand wash and basin, and samovar for boiling water for tea. the winter room where the whole family would live in winter was not huge, but it had different areas for different purposes. Like opposite the stove there will be a red corner with icons, and that's the corner where the most respected guests would sit, and bride and bridegroom during the wedding ceremony. There is a table there in that corner covered with a tablecloth. Then the corner in front of the stove, that's barbecue. That's for the lady of the house, with all sorts of pots and pans and stuff for cooking, and a cradle there as well for a tiny baby, which she would attend to, doing other things at the same time. Yeah, and this museum shows the whole world of the Russian village, the peasant world there, with bathhouses. Some of them are on stilts as well, from the same lowlands like the church you saw at the beginning of the story about this museum. Windmills, and this very picturesque chapel, a small structure, and a church there you can see on the bank of the small river. The museum, there are usually festivals, folk festivals organized in the museum, and that's during my time there. That's sort of mid-1980s, and usually a lot of people come from Kostроме and tourists that are there. And they're wonderful because people can see traditional songs and customs, like we showed the bits of wedding ceremony, for example, and people from the region show their arts and crafts as well. So that's the main
museum in Kostроме.
Sorry. That's the main attraction in Kostроме, I would say, yeah, and absolutely my favorite museum. And in County Durham, Beamish is my first choice. And it's built on the same principles as the Wooden Architecture Museum in Kostроме. And it started again around the same time, mid-1950s, by Beamish, yes, by Frank Atkinson, who was the director of Bowes Museum in County Durham. And he felt, he knew that life is changing so much, and things that are normal today and usual, and they will disappear tomorrow, or things that we knew yesterday, they're not here today already. So what he did, he came up with this idea for people to bring all old things that they possess, they could donate to the museum, and his principle was, we'll take everything, which I think was great, which was really, really important. We'll take everything you want to give us. And people did bring lots and lots and lots, and that's how he managed to collect all these exhibits, and to preserve and to show the life of the county of the beginning of the 20th century, so the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. So the territory is huge, and like I said, the principle was the same, like in the open air museum in Kostроме. They were bringing structures from various parts of County Durham and rebuilding them there. And we have this, the museum shows industrial heritage of County Durham in the northeast of England. Look, 1825. That's the first railway between Stockton and Darlington there, and you can actually have a ride on this train. Then there's a mine and you can go down the mine and you can feel how it felt to be a miner and in what conditions miners were working. And the guides that take you there down the mine, many of them used to be miners themselves. So it's so interesting, it's fascinating to listen to them. Then we have a farm. There's a whole huge area given to the farm where you can go into the farmer's house and see there's some pieces of bread there. You can smell bread as well because it's being baked there at the time. You can taste it. You can watch people making quilts and take part in it as well. You can see animals, and they are of the breeds that were typical for the time. Like here you can see this wonderful pig. So you can see it, you can smell it, you can hear the sounds. Then there's the town street with the houses of a piano teacher and the lawyer and a dentist. You can see all the instruments there, and can you imagine how it felt to be there at the dentist at the time, and the children's room and the dentist's house. There's a school, there's a church. Again, it's a very, very it's a living museum. It's a live museum. It's wonderful. You can touch things, you can take part in games. Again, they organize Georgian fairs, they organize all sorts of events there. It's that's the town street with lots of shops, and you go into a shop, like you go into this confectionery shop, wonderful packaging with boxes and tins like it used to be over a century ago. And then you go at the back of the shop and they make these boiled sweets and toffees and break them, and you can try them. You see them being made and you can try them as well. So there's a fish and chip shop.
Very enthusiastic.
It's wonderful. You can go there, multiple times, and for us it's really enjoyable, and it's growing, it's changing all the time, and you can not just see historical artifacts, but you can feel the atmosphere, and you can slide into the history. You can go back, travel back 100 and 150 years ago, and enjoy this atmosphere of the northeast of England. So I'll stop there. That's all I wanted to tell you. Obviously there are lots and lots of museums, both in Kostrom and in Darem, but that's what I love best. And if you are in Darem, County Darem, go to Beamish. That's the first museum I visited on my first visit to county. If you're in Kostroma, you cannot miss Ipatiev Monastery and Museum of Wooden Architecture. Yeah, if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. Sorry.
Thank you, Olga. I would like to thank you that this story about the Ipatiev Monastery bringing us into the mood of the Russian Easter time.
Yeah.
As in previous, of course, the whole Golden Ring, this story brings us, prepares, gives us the right mood to welcome the Russian Easter this weekend. And
Thank you.
I thank you for patience, the students from Novorossiysk. Are you still with us? So, do you have stories?
Yeah, surely.
So please, you're welcome.
Good evening,
Yes.
France. So
As we are facing 10 days of holidays.
Before our